Now we cross over to our Youngjun for Global Insight and an in-depth look at important developments in world affairs.
Thanks, Mark. It is indeed time for Global Insight, where we speak to experts from around the world on issues making headlines. Now, North Korea fired 4 rounds of missiles this month, once again defying United Nations resolutions. While North Korean leader Kim Jong-un barely mentioned the United States in his New Year's address, his regime now says it needs to prepare for a long-term confrontation with Washington. Pyongyang has warned that it may go back to testing nuclear weapons and long-range missiles, breaking a self-imposed freeze in place since 2018. And, well, it now looks like North Korea is up to its old tricks again. What does it want, and what lengths will it go to get it? To answer this question, we're joined by Youngjun Kim at Korea National Defense University, who is also a member of the National Security Advisory Board of the South Korean President's Office, and Bruce Bennett, Senior Defense Analyst at RAND Corporation. Thank you both for joining us today. Now, let's begin with you, Professor Kim. Now, North Korea said that it's going to reconsider its self-imposed freeze on testing nuclear weapons and long-range missile tests over what they called hostile US moves. What do you think of the timing of this kind of announcement, and what do you think was the reason behind it?
Thank you for having me. Definitely the timing is just right before the bloc presidential election, and also North Korea always want to have start this kind of provocation just like before they want to start the negotiation talks with the U.S. administration. We can remember 2017 and also 1990 Kim Jong-il period. So it is the timing absolutely aiming at the bloc presidential election, also as well as they want to hook the American people's attention to the North Korean issue.
And Dr. Bennett, I want to hear your thoughts on this as well. Why do you think North Korea is, pulling its sort tricks again, its sort playbook? What do you think it might want to possibly extract from the United States or South Korea this time around?
Well, I think we have to remember that Kim Jong-un is facing a fair amount of internal instability. Can't feed his people very well. He's out of consumer goods, not being able to fulfill demand there. And so he's looking for a way to look powerful. By putting pressure on the United States, he's hoping that the United States will make some concessions, as my colleague said. And I think that's the kind of thing that he hopes very much, that the U.S. is so tired of his provocations that the U.S. will compromise. I think, though, that he has to recognize that there's a danger to what he's doing, because it could affect the election in ways I don't think he wants it to do.
And, well, Dr. Bennett, it is concerning that North Korea threatened to start testing its nukes again. It hasn't done so for a couple of years, since 2017. And, well, how far along is North Korea in terms of its nuclear weapons program, and what kind of developments would worry you?
Well, I think we have to recognize that it's been almost 5 years since all of those tests that they made in 2017. And North Korea has continued to develop weapons. They've come up with new designs, undoubtedly. They have new longer-range missiles. They've only been testing their shorter-range missiles. They're very anxious, I'm sure their military is, to test these new capabilities they've been developing and make sure they work. They've had some missiles in the past that didn't work very well. So this is something they're anxious to do, to be able to have this. And I'm sure they have been putting some pressure on Kim Jong-un to justify them doing this in a way that the international community will continue to say, well, it's not a big deal. That's a mistake for Kim Jong-un. If he returns to nuclear weapon tests, the United States is forced to put serious pressure on. And even with what he's done recently, when he claims it's U.S. hostility, 6 missiles launched in 2 weeks is a tremendous amount of North Korean hostility.
And, well, Professor Kim, in recent months we've seen just a lot of countries around the world rushing to develop hypersonic glide vehicles, and North Korea, of course, has been one of them, and they claim to have tested this technology very recently, which the South Korean military dismissed. They said that it was more likely to be an ordinary ballistic missile that South Korea could have repelled. And the North, of course, hearing this response, it seemed rather annoyed about this. What is your opinion about the North's progress on these hypersonic glide vehicles? How far along do you think the regime is?
Absolutely. I absolutely agree with my colleague, Dr. Bruce Bennett of the Land Corporation. And technically, in this sense, the hypersonic missile, we cannot check. Nobody cannot inspect about the North Korean hypersonic capability. And unfortunately, North Korea has a very small territory to check their capability. So this target is aiming at the mainly American people and also North Korean people. Kim Jong-un have to show he is a strong leader. This kind of the argument from the North Korea, they have the hypersonic capability that we cannot check and we cannot trust at the moment.
And Dr. Bennett, how is the United States seeing this? How worried is it about the North's hypersonic glide vehicles? Does it pose an immediate threat?
We have to remember that, as my colleague Dr. Kim said, North Korea exaggerates its developments. They're trying to make the leader look strong. And in this case, even a Scud missile flies at hypersonic speed. It flies at Mach 5, the threshold of hypersonic, just as the engine is cutting off. So that doesn't make it a hypersonic missile. They're calling missiles hypersonic because of the speed they fly. That's not the definition of a hypersonic missile. Hypersonic missile flies at very low altitude in order to avoid defensive coverage. And that's not what Kim has fielded for all of what we can see so far. Since that's the case, the U.S. Defense Department has said, we can defend against these missiles. We can defend against Scuds, which fly up to hypersonic speed. So they haven't yet fielded what China has fielded and what Russia and the U.S. are working on, which is something that flies very fast at very low altitude.
And Professor Kim, of course, you mentioned that this hypersonic missile threat, it seems to be directed mostly at the United States for now. But say that North Korea was threatening South Korea, would we be able to, would we be capable of deflecting such vehicles with our existing anti-missile systems?
Yes, we have to prepare for for this kind of hypersonic missile capability. And no one country is able to defend at the moment the hypersonic missile capability, especially this idea, hypersonic capability is from the Russia to break the U.S. missile defense system. And even U.S. doesn't have a 100% capability to defend this kind of hypersonic missile against their territory. So anyway, the Iraq and the U.S. to prepare for this kind of hypersonic capability missile. So now it's past the two countries agree on the new strategic planning group for scenario North Korea using the nuclear and missile capability. So we will prepare for that.
Professor Kim, what would it mean for South Korea if the North begins testing nuclear weapons and long-range missiles again? How would that change the equation? And how should the ROK-US alliance really prepare for this kind of scenario?
So far, the ROK and U.S. military does not prepare for the using of the hypersonic missile capability in the combined exercise, especially in summer and Kirigil. So we need to have the scenario against the using of the North Korean hypersonic missile user in a war scenario. So we have to include that scenario in the ROK-US combined exercise.
Dr. Bennett, what do you think should be the response to this if North Korea continues to make these provocations and continue with its threats to launch missile tests and etc.? How do you think the South Korean and the American response should be?
Well, we have to remember what North Korea considers to be the biggest threat, which is outside information. We aren't using outside information in the way that we could that would threaten Kim Jong-un. There are many, many ways we could potentially do that. And we have some opportunities. We could invite North Koreans to come to graduate students to come to American universities. We could invite North Koreans to take American vaccine and see what difference it makes with the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccine. They seem to be very anxious to get that. So there are a variety of kinds of information we could use with North Korea. And I don't think Kim Jong-un's going to like that. He doesn't want the outside information. Remember, even recently, he called Korean culture and K-pop a vicious cancer, which was corrupting his youth. Well, because they're learning the truth about the world. And that's something we should be helping them learn.
And while time is of the essence, and Professor Kim, President Moon, he's about to step down in just weeks. And while President Biden, meanwhile, he's quite preoccupied with Beijing, Moscow and Tehran. Meanwhile, North Korea seems to be getting angrier and even more upset. Do you see any way of de-escalating the situation right now?
Yes, already Dr. Bruce Bennett said, I absolutely agree with his side. Fascinating. Maybe we can have the exchange program between the two countries, and for students. Also, we can ask the North Korea to open the border and to get a vaccination from the United States or United Nations. Also, we can have the start a second round of the negotiation. So now Kim Jong-un want to restart the negotiation, but at the same time, Kim Jong-un had to show he is a strong leader to North Korean people. So this kind of situation makes North Korea heavy, strong military capability for preparing for another scenario, just like before Iraq presidential election.
Well, I'm afraid we're going to have to end the discussion here today, but that was Youngjun Kim at Korea National Defense University and Bruce Bennett, Senior Defense Analyst at RAND Corporation. Thank you both so much for your insights today.